I never thought I'd be the guy to write something like this. You know, the kind of post where you bare your soul to strangers on the internet. But here I am, sitting in my dimly lit living room, a glass of cheap whiskey in hand, ready to spill the details of my crumbling marriage. This isn't a sob story. It's more a cautionary tale about love, betrayal, and the lengths a man will go to reclaim his narrative. My wife Lisa and I had been married for 6 years. I thought we were solid. We had a comfortable life in a suburban neighborhood, a couple of cats, and a steady routine. I worked long hours as an IT consultant, while Lisa had a flexible job as a marketing manager for a local firm. But lately, something felt off. I chalked it up to the usual stress of life, work deadlines, bills, and the monotony of daily chores. But there were signs. I just didn't want to see them. It started with her late nights. She'd come home later than usual, and when I asked about it, she'd brush it off with some excuse about meetings or needing to finish a project. You know how it is, right? She'd say with that dismissive tone that started to grate on me. Then there were the frequent girls' nights that seemed to pop up out of nowhere. Instinctively, I felt something wasn't right, but I tried to trust her. I didn't want to be that paranoid husband who jumps to conclusions. Things hit a boiling point one evening while I was cleaning up the house. I found her phone on the coffee table, buzzing with notifications. Normally I wouldn't snoop, but I picked it up and I instantly regretted it. A message popped up from a guy named Mike. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing." The world felt like it slowed to a crawl as I read and reread the message. I could feel my heart race, my palms sweaty, and my stomach twist into knots. I confronted her the next day. We were sitting in the kitchen, and I had that phone in my hand, my voice trembling as I asked her about Mike. The look on her face was a mix of surprise and annoyance. "How could you even think that? You're being ridiculous." She snapped, her eyes narrowing like a cat ready to pounce. I showed her the message, my voice steady with anger and hurt. "What is this, Lisa?" Her excuses came tumbling out. "Oh, it's just a coworker. You know how close we all are at work. It's not what you think." But the more she talked, the more her words sounded hollow. I could feel the betrayal wash over me like a cold wave. I wanted to believe her, but my gut was screaming at me. Deep down, I knew this was more than just a harmless flirtation. The days that followed were a blur of chaos and emotion. I oscillated between fury and despair. I was angry at her, angry at myself for not seeing it sooner, and mostly I was heartbroken. I thought I knew her. This was the woman I had shared my life with, my dreams, my vulnerabilities. How could she do this to me? I remember sitting on the couch one night, staring blankly at the wall, trying to process what had happened. My mind raced with memories of our happier moments, our wedding day, vacations, even mundane evenings cuddled on the couch watching movies. Could all of that have been a lie? Was she really capable of betraying me this way? In those dark moments, I began to craft a plan. Not a vengeful plan, but a way to reclaim my narrative. It was time to take control, to turn the tables. I wasn't just going to let this define me or our marriage. I was going to confront this head on. I decided I'd start my own podcast, a platform where I could share my story, my feelings, and a new perspective on relationships. I wanted to showcase the complexities of love, trust, and betrayal. As I sat there, the idea began to feel less like a whim and more like a lifeline. I wanted to tell my side of the story, not just to the world but also to myself. This wasn't just about Lisa, it was about me finding my voice again. I would make her irrelevant in the narrative she had crafted in her betrayal. It was time to take back the power she had unjustly seized. What I didn't know then was how this decision would change everything. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about healing and self-discovery. As I prepared to dive into this new venture, I realized I was ready for whatever came next. I was done being a passive character in my own life. I was ready to write a new chapter. I dove into creating my podcast head first. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could express my pain and confusion without judgment. I named it Reclaiming My Story, which felt fitting. I bought a decent microphone, set up a little recording area in my home office, and began brainstorming topics. The first episodes were raw, filled with my emotional turmoil and reflections on trust and betrayal. I shared my feelings about Lisa's infidelity, the heartbreak, and the confusion. I talked about the signs I had missed and the feeling of having the rug pulled out from under me. I interviewed a few friends who had been through similar situations, creating an engaging dialogue about relationships and the complexities of love. It felt good to connect with others who understood my pain. The feedback was overwhelming. Strangers reached out to me, sharing their own stories of betrayal and heartache. I realized I wasn't alone in this. There were countless others who had been through similar dark valleys. In a strange way, it empowered me. Each episode became a step toward healing, a cathartic release of pent-up emotions. The more I shared, the more I felt like I was taking control of my narrative. As my podcast gained traction, I started to notice changes in my relationship with Lisa. Initially, she was dismissive of my new project, rolling her eyes and calling it a midlife crisis. But it didn't take long for my podcast to catch her attention. After one particularly candid episode went viral, I received messages from people all over the country, praising my honesty and vulnerability. I could sense her unease grow as my platform expanded. One evening, while I was editing an episode, Lisa stormed into my office. "You're not going to keep talking about me like I'm some villain, are you?" Her voice was sharp, almost accusatory. I looked up from my computer, surprised at her sudden outburst. "You're the one who decided to cheat, Lisa. I'm just telling my story." "Write your story," she scoffed. "You've turned this into a pity party. You're making me look like a monster." I took a deep breath, keeping my tone even. "I'm sharing my truth. You made choices that led us here. I don't owe you a sanitized version of my feelings." She huffed and turned to leave, but something shifted in me at that moment. I wasn't going to let her manipulate the situation any longer. I had found my voice and refused to let her silence me. In the following weeks, I continued to pour my energy into the podcast, gaining both followers and critics. I had some heartfelt conversations with listeners, often discussing the nuances of relationships, love, trust, and the devastating impact of betrayal. I started to feel like I could help others navigate their own struggles, and it gave me a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. But Lisa wasn't about to let this go. She began to retaliate in her own ways. She'd throw little jabs during dinner, mocking my podcasting aspirations, saying things like, "How's the therapy session going today?" It was frustrating, but in some twisted way it fueled my determination. The more she pushed, the more I felt compelled to keep going. One night, as I sat in the living room recording another episode, I received an unexpected call. It was my old college buddy, Mark. We hadn't spoken in years, but he had heard about my podcast and wanted to catch up. We spent hours reminiscing, and somewhere along the line, Mark mentioned that he had gone through a rough patch himself. "I just got out of a messy divorce," he confessed. "It was brutal, but I've learned so much from it. You know, sometimes people just don't have the courage to be honest with themselves or their partners." I listened intently as he shared his story, feeling a connection I hadn't anticipated. His insights resonated with me as I reflected on my own situation. Mark's honesty reminded me that vulnerability was a strength. It was a reminder that I was on a journey, navigating my own heartbreak while encouraging others to do the same. As the days turned into weeks, I realized my emotional state was shifting. I was no longer just the husband betrayed. I was becoming a man with a voice, a story, and a mission. I was starting to feel more in control of my life. I had built a community, a space where we could openly discuss the complexities of love and loss. Yet Lisa's resentment grew more palpable. She felt trapped in a corner while I thrived. One night, after a particularly heated argument, I could see the mask of indifference slip from her face. "You think you're the victim here, but you're not," she spat. "You've turned this into a spectacle, and I'm the one who's suffering." Her words stung. I understood the pain in her voice, but I also felt a sense of liberation. I wasn't going to let her guilt trip control my narrative anymore. I had every right to express my feelings, to talk about my experience, and to share my truth. As I prepared for my next episode, I knew I had to confront my emotions more directly. I needed to explore not only the betrayal, but also the journey of forgiveness and moving forward. It became clear that I was on a path of self-discovery, and my podcast was the vehicle driving me forward. Little did I know, the next twist in my story was just around the corner, and it would test my resolve in ways I could never have predicted. As my podcast continued to gain traction, I found myself immersed in a world of conversations that explored the intricacies of relationships. I hosted guests who had experienced betrayal, recovery, and everything in between. It felt like I was building something meaningful, a community where people could connect over their shared pain and learn from each other's journeys. The catharsis I felt was palpable, but there was still the looming presence of Lisa, her resentment thickening like fog in our home. One evening, after a long day of recording and editing, I returned home to find Lisa sitting on the couch, staring blankly at the television. She didn't look up as I entered, but I could sense the tension in the air. I decided to test the waters, breaking the silence. "Hey, do you want to listen to my latest episode?" She let out an exaggerated sigh. "Not really. I've heard enough of your therapy sessions for a lifetime." The bitterness in her voice was unmistakable, but I was determined not to let it affect me. I walked to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and sat down in the armchair opposite her. I took a sip and tried to engage her, asking about her day. She shrugged and muttered something about work, but her disinterest was obvious. It was the same script every day, a mixture of silence and snarky remarks that made the walls feel like they were closing in. I began to feel claustrophobic in my own home. A week later, I received an email from a listener named Sarah, who shared her own story of betrayal. She had been divorced for 2 years after discovering her husband's affair, and she wanted to express how much my podcast had helped her heal. Her words touched me deeply, and I decided to invite her onto the show. I thought it would be a powerful episode, two people impacted by betrayal, navigating their way through the aftermath. The episode went live, and it quickly became one of my most popular. Listeners resonated with the raw honesty and vulnerability of it all. I felt like we were striking a chord, opening up conversations that many people were afraid to have. But it also caught Lisa's attention in a way I hadn't anticipated. That night, she confronted me, her eyes ablaze with fury. "You are exploiting this situation for your own gain," she shouted, her voice echoing through the house. "Do you even care how this affects me?" I was taken aback by her accusation. "Exploiting? I'm trying to share my story and help others. You can't expect me to hide my truth because you're uncomfortable." Lisa's expression contorted with anger and despair. "You've turned me into the villain in your little saga, don't you see that? I'm not the only one at fault here." For the first time in a long while, I felt a flicker of doubt. Was I being too harsh? Was I really painting her as a villain? But the moment quickly passed as I remembered the pain I had endured. I realized that this battle wasn't about right or wrong. It was about me reclaiming my narrative and taking ownership of my feelings. The weeks turned into a blur of recording, editing, and engaging with listeners. But amidst all this, Lisa started to change. Instead of the angry outbursts, she became sullen and withdrawn, retreating into herself. She rarely spoke to me, and when she did, it was often punctuated by long silences and heavy sighs. One day, I came home to find her sitting on the floor of the living room surrounded by boxes. Confused, I dropped my bag and asked, "What's going on?" Her eyes were red-rimmed and she looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do this anymore." "What do you mean?" I asked, dread pooling in the pit of my stomach. "I mean this," she gestured around the room, her hands trembling. "This house, this life, us. We're not the same people we used to be, and we're holding each other back." I felt my heart race. "Are you saying you want to leave?" "I don't know, I just feel so lost," she replied, her voice breaking. "You've changed and I've changed. We're just not who we were." Tears streamed down her cheeks and I felt a pang of empathy, but the anger I had felt was still simmering beneath the surface. "Everything feels different because you made those choices, Lisa," I said, my voice firm but not unkind. "I'm trying to find my way back to myself after what you did. You can't just walk away from that." She looked at me, and for a moment I could see the cracks in her facade. "I didn't mean for any of this to happen," she sobbed. "I was just looking for something I felt was missing, but now I feel trapped." I paused, searching for the right words. We both made mistakes, but I'm trying to move forward not just for me but for us. If you're willing to put in the effort, we can try to rebuild. But if you just want to run away, then maybe we should talk about what that really means. The air between us felt heavy with unspoken words and unresolved feelings. We were at a crossroads, and I suddenly realized that I had a choice to make. It wasn't just about my pain or her mistakes. It was about whether we could find a way to meet somewhere in the middle. That night, I recorded my thoughts, reflecting on our conversation and the uncertainty that lay ahead. I understood that healing wasn't just about sharing my story. It was also about hearing hers. Perhaps it was time to open that door, to explore the possibility of forgiveness and finding a way to navigate this mess together. But even as I contemplated this, I couldn't shake the feeling that more surprises were headed our way, ones that would test our resolve even further. In the weeks that followed our fraught conversation, there was an unexpected shift in the atmosphere at home. While Lisa's emotional walls remained up, I sensed a cautious willingness in her to engage more openly. It was as if we were both tiptoeing around the remnants of our shattered trust, trying to piece together what was left of our relationship. I was determined to explore this new territory, but I still felt that giant chasm between us, a void filled with hurt and betrayal. I continued to pour my heart into my podcast, blending my journey of healing with broader conversations about relationships. Each episode felt like a step forward, a way to channel my pain into something constructive. In one episode, I discussed forgiveness and what it truly meant, not just forgiving the person who hurt you, but also forgiving yourself for allowing it to happen. It resonated with many, and I received an influx of messages from listeners who were navigating similar waters. One evening, as I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop open, preparing to record another episode, I noticed Lisa sitting across from me, a distant expression on her face. "You really love doing this, don't you?" she asked, her tone laced with a mix of curiosity and sadness. "It feels like my therapy," I replied, looking up from the screen. "It helps me process everything, and I like connecting with others who are going through similar experiences." She nodded slowly, and I could see her wrestling with her own thoughts. "You've found a voice, and I'm still lost," she confessed, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "Maybe we can figure this out together," I suggested, feeling a flicker of hope. "What if you came on the podcast? You could share your side of things, how you felt during all of this. It might help us both." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You really want me to share my story?" "Absolutely," I said, leaning forward. "I think it could be a step toward understanding each other. We both have our own narratives, but the truth is they're intertwined. We need to address that." Lisa hesitated, biting her lip as she contemplated the idea. "What if people judge me? What if they think I'm a horrible person?" "Everyone makes mistakes, Lisa. It's part of being human," I assured her. "But sharing our truth could be powerful. It could show that healing is messy and complicated." After a long silence, she nodded slowly. "Okay, I'll do it." The next week, we recorded our first episode together. I was nervous, unsure of how it would play out. As we sat across from each other, microphones set up and the record button pressed, I felt the weight of the moment. "Welcome to a special episode of Reclaiming My Story," I began, my voice steady. "Today, I'm joined by my wife, Lisa, who has graciously agreed to share her side of our journey." Lisa took a deep breath, her hands trembling a bit as she spoke. "Hi, everyone. This is definitely not something I thought I'd be doing, but here we are." As she began to share her perspective, I was struck by the vulnerability in her voice. She talked about her insecurities, the feelings of inadequacy that had driven her to seek validation outside our marriage. "I wasn't trying to hurt anyone," she said, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I just felt so lost, and in the moment I made a terrible decision." Listening to her, I realized how deeply her feelings of unworthiness ran. It was a side of her I hadn't fully appreciated before, the struggle to feel valued and loved. It humanized her in a way that made the betrayal feel more complicated, but it also stirred anger within me. How could she have turned to another man instead of talking to me? I pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the conversation. We began to explore not just her choices, but also how we could move forward. It was raw and emotional, and by the time the episode wrapped up, both of us were spent. Afterward, I hit stop on the recording and looked at her. She was visibly shaken. That was hard, she admitted, wiping her eyes, but it also felt freeing. Yeah, I replied, feeling a sense of relief wash over me. I think we both took a step forward today. Over the following weeks, as we released the episode and the responses poured in, something miraculous began to happen. Listeners reached out, not only to me but to Lisa as well, thanking her for her honesty and sharing their own struggles with vulnerability and infidelity. It felt like we were part of a larger conversation, and that connection was healing for both of us. But just when I thought we were making progress, Lisa received a message from Mike, the guy she had cheated with. I had a gut feeling it was bad news. One afternoon, I walked into the living room to find her staring at her phone, her face pale. "What's wrong?" I asked, my heart dropping. "He wants to talk," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said he needs closure." My stomach dropped. Closure, what does that even mean? "I don't know," she replied, her eyes wide with fear. "He said he's been thinking about everything and that it's been eating him up inside." "Are you going to meet him?" I asked, trying to keep my tone steady. "I don't know," she exclaimed, her frustration bubbling over. "Part of me wants to, and part of me knows it's a terrible idea. But what if he does have something important to say?" My mind raced. I had worked so hard to rebuild our foundation, and now it felt like it was crumbling again. "Lisa, you have to think about how this affects us. You can't just open up those wounds again." She sat in silence, her brow furrowed. "I just wanted to understand why I did what I did," she finally said. "Maybe if I hear him out, I can find some peace." The air crackled with tension as I struggled with the weight of her words. It was a precarious situation, one that could either lead to healing or reopen the wounds of betrayal. I needed to trust her, but the idea of her meeting him felt like a betrayal all over again. As I watched her wrestle with the decision, I realized that this was yet another test, one that would require not just trust, but faith in the journey we were on together. But even as I tried to remain hopeful, a sense of foreboding loomed over us, hinting that the path ahead was still fraught with uncertainty and hidden dangers. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions as Lisa struggled with whether or not to meet Mike. It became the elephant in the room, and I could feel the tension tightening between us. I tried to stay calm, but my mind was racing. Every time she picked up her phone, I felt my heart skip a beat, wondering if she was texting him or, worse, setting up a meeting. Finally, one evening, I decided we needed to have a serious talk. We sat down in the living room, both of us on edge. "We can't keep avoiding this," I said, my voice steady but firm. "You need to make a decision about Mike. It's eating away at us." "I know," she replied, her gaze fixed on the floor. "But you have to understand, it's not just about him. It's about me trying to make sense of everything. I want to know why I did what I did." "Lisa, meeting him isn't going to give you closure," I said, leaning forward. "You need to focus on us and the work we have to do together. This isn't just about your past, it's about our future." She sighed heavily, her shoulders slumping as if the weight of the world rested on them. "I get that, but I feel like there's a part of me that needs to face this. I can't just pretend it didn't happen." "True, but confronting it with him could open old wounds. What if it leads to more confusion instead of clarity?" She looked up at me, her eyes filled with uncertainty. "What if he can explain things in a way that helps me understand? I need to be sure that I've made the right choices for myself and for us." My frustration bubbled to the surface. "And what about my feelings? You want to find closure with him, but what about my closure? I feel like I'm stuck in the waiting room while you figure this out." At that, her expression hardened and she crossed her arms defensively. "I'm not asking for your permission, but I thought I could at least explain myself to you. I didn't want this to divide us further." "Maybe it's too late for that," I shot back, my anger flaring. "You may think this meeting is just about you, but it affects me too. You need to understand how this feels for me." She looked taken aback, her face paling as the realization hit her. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to dismiss your feelings. I don't know how to fix this." The conversation ended with a heavy silence hanging between us. It felt like the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving us both gasping for clarity. I could see the turmoil in her eyes, mirroring my own internal struggle. I wanted her to heal, but I also wanted to protect myself from further hurt. That night, I recorded an episode of my podcast, pouring my feelings into my words. I talked about the complexities of trust and how betrayal ripples through every aspect of a relationship. I shared my fear of losing Lisa to the past and the anxiety that came with it. I felt a renewed sense of purpose as I spoke into the microphone, connecting with listeners who had been in similar situations. But as I finished recording, I felt a pang of loneliness. I had created this platform for healing, but it felt like I was still walking a tightrope between love and betrayal in my own life. The next day, after much back and forth, Lisa finally made a decision. "I'm going to meet him," she said, her voice steadier than I expected, but her eyes betrayed her uncertainty. "But I want you to come with me." I blinked in surprise, caught off guard by her request. "You want me to go with you to meet the guy you cheated on me with?" "Yes," she replied, her voice firm. "I think it would help if you were there. It's about facing this together as a team." I had mixed feelings. Part of me wanted to protect myself and stay as far away from Mike as possible, but another part of me recognized that this was an opportunity for us to build trust. After a long pause, I nodded. "Okay, we'll go together." The day of the meeting loomed ahead like a storm cloud, and my anxiety began to mount. I felt like a gladiator stepping into the arena, unsure whether I would emerge victorious or crushed under the weight of betrayal. Lisa and I agreed to meet Mike at a coffee shop that was halfway between our places, a neutral ground that felt less intimidating. As we arrived, I could see Mike sitting at a corner table, looking as if he were waiting for Judgment Day. He spotted us and stood up, a strange mix of nervousness and confidence on his face. I felt a surge of protectiveness for Lisa as we approached him. "Thanks for meeting us," Lisa said, her voice steady despite the tremors beneath the surface. "Of course," Mike replied, glancing between us. "I appreciate you both being willing to talk." We all sat down and the tension in the air was palpable. I could feel the weight of history bearing down on us, the memories of betrayal and pain intertwining with the present moment. This was a turning point and I wasn't sure where it would take us. "Why did you reach out, Mike?" I asked, cutting to the chase. "What do you want from this conversation?" He shifted in his seat, looking uncomfortable. "I wanted to apologize. I know what I did was wrong, and I never intended to hurt either of you." "Apologies don't fix what you broke," I shot back, my frustration bubbling to the surface. "True," he eyed, meeting my gaze, "but I've spent a lot of time thinking about everything, and I realize now how selfish I was." Lisa spoke up, her voice stronger than I expected. "You're right, Mike, but I also need to understand what drove me to you in the first place. I can't just walk away from this without facing it." He nodded, visibly taken aback. "I think we both made choices that led to this. But I want you to know it wasn't just about sex for me. I thought there was something real there." My anger flared. "You were both seeking validation in all the wrong places. It was a choice to betray us." Lisa reached out and placed her hand on mine, grounding me. "We're here to process this together, remember." The conversation spiraled into a complex web of emotions, regrets, explanations, and painful realizations. As Mike spoke about his own insecurities and the reasons behind his actions, I began to see him not just as the enemy, but as another flawed human being who had made a monumental mistake. When we finished our conversation, I felt an unexpected sense of relief. It was as if some of the weight had been lifted, if only slightly. Lisa and I walked out of the coffee shop, the air between us feeling a touch lighter. "Thank you for being there," she said, her voice soft. "I know it wasn't easy." I nodded, still processing everything we had talked about. "It wasn't, but I think we needed to face this together. I'm still hurt and it's going to take time, but I see that you're committed to working on this." As we drove home in silence, I realized that confronting the past didn't erase the pain, but it did lay the groundwork for a potential future. We had taken a significant step toward healing, but the journey wasn't over yet. I still had a long way to go to forgive, not just her, but myself for letting this happen. I knew I needed to keep sharing my story, not just for myself, but for others who were dealing with similar betrayals. Healing was a process, one that involved vulnerability, honesty, and a willingness to face the uncomfortable truths. And as I reflected on what we had just experienced, I felt a renewed sense of purpose. The podcast had become more than just a platform for my voice. It was a powerful tool for transformation, not just for me, but for Lisa as well. As we both learned to navigate this new path, I could only hope that we could emerge stronger on the other side. But I was painfully aware that the final test of our resolve was still to come. The weeks that followed our meeting with Mike were a strange mixture of hope and tension. Lisa and I had taken a step towards healing, but the road ahead was still fraught with uncertainty. While the conversation with Mike had brought some closure, it also opened the door to deeper discussions between Lisa and me, conversations we had previously avoided. I continued to dedicate myself to the podcast, using it as an outlet for my emotions. I shared insights from our recent experiences, focusing on themes of forgiveness, healing, and the importance of confronting one's past. The response from listeners was overwhelmingly positive, and I found strength in knowing that my story resonated with so many others. But as I poured my heart into my episodes, I still felt the shadow of betrayal lingering. Lisa was trying to do her part, attending therapy sessions and actively working on herself. She was more engaged than ever, but there were moments when I could see the weight of guilt pressing down on her. It was a constant reminder of what had happened, and it was difficult for both of us to move past it completely. One evening, as we sat on the couch together, I sensed a shift. "Can we talk?" she asked, her voice tentative. "Of course," I replied, bracing myself for whatever was coming next. "I've been thinking a lot about our journey in the podcast," she began, her eyes cast downward. "I know I hurt you deeply and I want to understand how to make things right, but I also realize that I need to start working on my own self-worth." I nodded, encouraging her to continue. "It's important to recognize that, Lisa. You can't rely solely on our relationship to validate yourself." "Right," she said, her gaze now meeting mine. "I've been talking to my therapist about how I need to find fulfillment within myself first. I don't want to be the person who seeks validation through others ever again." "That's a good realization," I said, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. "But I want to be honest with you, I still struggle with trusting you completely. It's going to take time." "I understand that," she replied softly. "I'm not asking for blind trust. I just want to work toward rebuilding what we had brick by brick." We spent hours talking that night, peeling back layers of hurt and mistrust. It was exhausting and liberating all at once. As I listened to Lisa open up about her insecurities and her motivations, I began to see glimpses of the woman I'd fallen in love with, the woman who had felt lost and broken. By the time we went to bed, something had shifted again. For the first time in months, I felt a fragile sense of hope. We were still in the thick of it, but there was a possibility of rebuilding. It wouldn't happen overnight, and there would be setbacks, but at least we were both committed to the process. Then came the day I had dreaded. I received a phone call from a listener who I had become friends with through the podcast. Sarah. She had shared her own story of betrayal and healing, and we had developed a mutual respect and friendship through our conversations. But this call felt different. "Hey, I just wanted to give you a heads up," she said, her tone serious. "I heard from Mike. He's been reaching out to some of the listeners, trying to get in touch with people who have been affected by your podcast." My heart sank. "What do you mean? Why would he do that?" "Apparently, he feels guilty about everything and thinks he can help by sharing his side of the story. He's looking to create his own platform," Sarah explained. "It sounds like he wants to turn this into some kind of redemption arc." I felt a surge of anger. He doesn't get to rewrite the narrative. He hurt both of us. He doesn't get to spin this in his favor. "I know," Sarah said, "but I wanted you to be aware of it. I thought it might affect your podcast." I hung up the phone, my mind racing. I felt the ground beneath me shift as the potential for another wave of chaos loomed. I immediately called Lisa, my voice tight with tension. "You won't believe this. Mike is trying to reach out to listeners and make himself the victim." Her reaction mirrored my own. "What? That's insane. He doesn't get to play the victim here. I can't believe he would try to drag other people into this mess." "Exactly. We need to address this before it gets out of hand," I said, packing around the living room. "We can't let him control the narrative again." After a long discussion, we decided to record an emergency episode to address the situation head-on. We wanted to be transparent with our audience and reaffirm our commitment to healing while standing firm against Mike's attempts to manipulate the narrative. As we sat down to record, I could feel the anxiety washing over us. "Welcome back to Reclaiming My Story," I began, my voice steady despite the whirlwind of emotions inside me. "Today, we have something important to address." Lisa chimed in, her voice firm. "We've received some unsettling news regarding Mike. We want to speak directly to our listeners about this situation and clarify our stance." We laid it out, our ongoing journey, the work we were doing, and the fact that Mike's attempts to reshape the story were not only misguided but harmful. We reaffirmed our commitment to honesty and healing, emphasizing that betrayal is a complicated web of emotions and choices. By the end of the episode, I felt a sense of resolve wash over me. We had taken our power back, reminding everyone, including ourselves, that we were in control of our narrative. It wasn't up to Mike how this story unfolded. It was ours to tell. In the days that followed, I felt a renewed sense of strength. The fire that had ignited within me since starting the podcast had only grown brighter. I wasn't just reclaiming my story, I was reclaiming my life. Lisa and I continued to have honest conversations, working through our feelings, building our trust, and learning to communicate better. We even began attending couples therapy, and it became a safe space for us to navigate our emotions together. As I reflected on our journey, I realized that healing is not linear. It's messy, convoluted, and often filled with setbacks. But it's also a path to understanding and growth, both individually and as a couple. I learned that sometimes it takes losing yourself to find a stronger version of who you really are. I also discovered the importance of sharing one's truth, not just for personal catharsis, but to inspire others who may be navigating similar pain. Though our future remained uncertain, I felt hope blooming amidst the rubble of our past. We were both committed to forging a new path together, one built on honesty, vulnerability, and the understanding that, while the scars of betrayal may never fully fade, they can serve as a reminder of how far we've come. And as I embraced this new chapter, I couldn't help but feel that we were finally on a journey of rebuilding, not just our marriage but ourselves, together.